Hi there, and welcome to the Play Therapy Circle. Before we begin, please note this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only. It does not provide therapeutic advice, and listening does not create a client-therapist relationship. All views expressed are my own, and any case examples shared have been de-identified to protect privacy. If you're seeking personal support, please reach out to a qualified mental health professional in your area. Hi, and welcome to an episode of the Play Therapy Circle. I'm Kylie Ellison, a therapist, clinical supervisor, and play therapy trainer, and I'm so grateful you're here. This podcast is a space for thoughtful, soulful conversations about child-centered therapy, play-based work, and what it means to show up with presence and compassion, both for our clients and for ourselves. Whether you're a seasoned play therapist, a student just starting out, or someone deeply passionate about working with children, you belong here. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Play Therapy Circle podcast. I'm your host, Kylie Ellison, and I am so glad you are here. Welcome everyone to episode 11. Woohoo! We are trucking along. We are getting these episodes done. So welcome to another week. I hope you all had a lovely weekend last weekend and going into the coming weekend. I have sadly had the flu, so if I sound a little bit different today, my apologies. I am still on the recovery train. Hopefully, I will be better in the next couple of days, but it is, as I've talked to you guys before, it's spring here, it's getting warmer, the weather is beautiful, and yeah, I hope wherever you are listening in the world that you are having a lovely week as well. I wanted to highlight that we discovered just in the last week that we have listeners from around the globe, which is so exciting. So for those listeners listening from the USA, listening from the UK, listening from Japan, listening from New Zealand, listening from the Netherlands, and of course Australia, a big warm welcome to the Play Therapy Circle. We are so grateful that you are here. I am truly touched by so many listening and supporting our podcast. And so I can't wait to share more of our journey in the weeks and months ahead. So please make sure you're following us on our Instagram at Play Therapy Circle Podcast to follow along our adventures and keep up to date with our podcast listenings. And of course, you can hear us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and wherever you enjoy your podcast. So thank you so much. Especially a big shout out. Our biggest listeners in the USA are in Texas. So if you are listening from Texas today, a big warm welcome to you. I am so grateful. I personally do not know anyone in Texas that I've ever personally connected with. I love that it has made its way there. So I'm so grateful. And as always, we love your support and following along. And so please feel free to share your feedback along the way as well, because we love that too. I hope you found useful last week's episode when I've begun to introduce those key skills of child-centered play therapy, and we covered last week tracking. This week, what I would like to do is cover reflecting feelings, and next week's podcast will be on limit setting. So we really are getting back to basics and really starting from that foundational level up to talk about these different aspects of practice and of course the element of skills and skill development. So I hope you found tracking helpful last week, that episode. So now we're going to dive into reflecting feelings today. What I want to set the tone, set the scene for this particular episode is looking at and understanding reflecting feelings as being very much around naming and communicating back to the child the emotional tone behind their behavior, their words, or their play. I think that it is something that beginning play therapists do grapple with. And so for all of you out there who are beginning in this field, I just want you to know that you are seen and heard, that this is a challenging skill. Even for those who have previous experience in delivering therapy and other modalities, There is a challenge when we step into the CCPT space where we're not necessarily getting that verbal confirmation from a child that we're on the right track when it comes to reflecting those feelings. So I just want to validate, as we do in the playroom, and recognize some of that anxiety for some of those beginning play therapists who might be struggling in this area. That is very normal and is part of that growth journey for you. So what are we doing? We're not just labeling those feelings and helping to build that emotional literacy, but we're validating the emotion underneath. So we are observing, which is all about that skill of tracking, where we're taking in the child's play, we're taking time to observe and reflect what we're seeing. This is that next level of we're observing and reflecting what we're seeing in relation to that underlying emotion that the child is expressing. It's not just their play. And I think that can also be a beginning play therapist pitfall of focusing more on the play and on the behavior and maybe any of the verbal communication you get in the playroom, but not necessarily looking at those nonverbal cues and looking at those emotional expressions that may not be as obvious. So it's really important that when we're doing this and we're reflecting feelings, it's about helping the child feel truly seen and understood, not just observed. So this is why I've done it in a staggered process in these podcast episodes, because laying that foundation of that fundamental skill of tracking is important, but that next level of extension of your abilities as a play therapist incorporates both that tracking and then going deeper to reflect those feelings. So let's talk a little bit about it some more. So what's the rationale behind why we do this? So very often, and we also know developmentally, that children, usually from the ages of 2 to 10 or a little bit older, really struggle to put words to their feelings. It is very common, and I've certainly encountered it in the last 10 years as a CCPT practitioner, that many parents will say to me, I just tell him, use your words, use your words. And it makes me a little uncomfortable because, and I obviously don't share that outwardly, but I am conscious of the fact that for many children, putting words to their feelings is not an easy task, nor is it something that they find achievable to do sometimes, not even trying, but actually being successful in communicating those feelings with words. So what we are trying to do in the playroom, and you guys remember I've mentioned this before, we very much abide by that principle that Gary Landry talks about in The Art of the Relationship around facilitating a socially acceptable relationship. And so part of that is role modeling as the play therapist, some of that reflecting of that feelings element in the playroom to help develop that emotional vocabulary and that emotional literacy so that they can then internalize and use that themselves. So it's not an overt process. We're not teaching the child. We're not saying, okay, this is what the word happy means and then showing a happy face. We're not doing that in the playroom. It is absolutely the agenda and at the pace of the child. But by using this skill throughout the work that we do, those moments and those opportunities to be able to reflect feelings comes up very regularly in our work. It absolutely provides validation to the child that their experiences are real. And this is something that I think is often a challenge in the child counselling space when we are working with parents and caregivers, when we meet for that initial consultation and they give us the history of the child and the backstory of the child and those presenting issues. And then we meet the child in the playroom and sometimes we get different information. What the parent has shared with us may be one part of their experience, but there's also all of these other elements that we get to witness and understand in the playroom. And some of that may be around trauma experiences that the parents haven't disclosed to us, that the child wants to share with us in therapy. So it's very important that we, regardless of what we have been told in terms of the parent or caregiver or stakeholder input, that we validate their experiences and their feelings, because for them, it's real. We want them to know that their feelings are acceptable and that they are safe in the therapy space. So that's all super, super important for that growth and learning and healing for kids. We also want to develop kids' self-awareness and their regulation. So when they hear those feelings mirrored back by us, both in that verbal and nonverbal communication, so we're doing it with our facial expressions, we're doing it with our tone of voice, and we're using our words, we as the adults, to reflect those feelings, the child then instinctively begins to connect with those body sensations and actions with words. So how cool is that? That we can have that experiential learning in real time by purely just reflecting back their feelings. So I hope it's starting to make sense about how powerful this skill can be. And certainly when I'm connecting with supervisees, one of the things that I'm always sharing is this idea of if we are really challenged, if we're thrown off our game, we're feeling like our congruence has been impacted, we're being rattled ourselves in terms of the content of the play, say, we are always, as a first starting point, going back to reflecting feelings, if nothing else, in the playroom, because that helps to build and connect a therapeutic alliance with the child, but also helps in that de-escalation, in that validation, and helps us to ground ourselves in the space as well. It, as I was just saying, strengthens the therapeutic alliance. The child experiences us as attuned, empathetic, trustworthy, authentic as well. There is so many benefits when we sit in that space. So it is incredibly powerful and incredibly valuable. It also, and it goes without saying, we come from our Carl Rogerian person-centered roots in our psychotherapy of practice. So it's very much around Carl Rogers certainly acknowledging and working from the premise that Rogers believed that empathetic understanding is at the heart of change. And I guess I extend to each of you listening, if it comes up for you, if you were to take a moment to think of a time, and you can either do this now or later, that's okay, where you have truly felt understood in your feelings. And that could be an interaction with a teacher, it could be with a peer, it could be with a neighbor, it could be with a parent, an auntie or uncle, whoever. When we think of those moments when somebody has truly seen us for who we are, or truly empathetically understands, there is so much peace with that. As an adult, there is so much validation and there's so much healing with that. So that's what we're trying to offer to the kids in our playrooms as well. So what are some of those core skills we need to consider, guys, as especially beginning play therapists? And even for those of you who are listening who are seasoned, who need a little tune-up in terms of some of your skills. Here's some of those things to remember. So tone of voice is super, super important. So we want it to be warm, we want it to be empathetic, we want it to be connecting in the way that we are using our tone to communicate our message of how we are picking up on those feelings they're expressing and reflecting that back to the child. It's definitely not clinical and it's not over-exaggerated either. We can do it in a calm voice. We can use simplicity when we need to. So when we have children that are, say, 2, we're going to reflect feelings differently to a 2-year-old than we are to a 10 or 11-year-old. And that just goes without saying. We acknowledge child development theory in that criteria. We want to match the intensity of it as well. I do find that this is probably one of the things that I go all in the playroom when I am connecting with children. I don't think, and everyone can have a different position on this, so I'm just sharing my view. I don't think myself and who I am as a person can be truly congruent, truly authentic if I am not matching that affect in the playroom and joining with them and mirroring what is happening, because I want to really communicate both through my nonverbal and verbal communication that I am empathetically hearing and understanding them. And I can't do that if I'm just using the words and I'm not giving any of that nonverbal communication. So very, very important. Timing as well. So I guess I want to give you guys that permission for anyone who's been struggling with this, that not every action needs a reflection. And in fact, when we think about some of the roots of CCPT as well, and some of that historical backstory, when we look into our psychodynamic psychotherapy roots, that unconscious and conscious mind, and certainly the transference and countertransference we experience in the playroom is very much about sitting in the uncomfortable. And that's something we will talk about over the course of the podcast and unpack further. But it is something I want to give you guys permission to do, to not always have a reflection, not always have a response, that sometimes sitting in that space of respectful moment of silence and reflection, it can be just as powerful. So choose those moments that you want to deepen that connection, would be my message. So we can give so many examples of how we do this, guys. And I feel like when we are talking about this to beginning play therapists, we often say that an easy way to remove ourselves from the playroom, not so much in terms of our physical presence, but just in terms of what words we use and what statements we use, is very much starting it with you or you are. And that really just strategically helps us to give a reflection back to the child as opposed to including us in that process. So instead of saying, I think maybe you're feeling angry right now, I've used an I statement there, and it's certainly been initially about myself and then what I think the child is telling me. Whereas if I rephrase that to say something like, you're feeling really angry right now, you're just letting me know. That is very much about putting the child in the lead and validating what might be coming up for them. What I always share in this space that I think is so cool about CCPT is that if we are reflecting those feelings and we get it wrong, the child will correct you. So I think, again, we can have a nervousness and an anxiety ourselves as beginning play therapists to have a go at reflecting feelings because we don't want to get it wrong. We want to get it right every time because we worry about what effect that would have on the alliance or on the child themselves. And that's the incredible thing about this work, is that it is so gentle, it's so led by the child, and the child gets to be the expert in this space. So they get to tell us if we get it wrong. And what an incredible moment of learning and healing for kids if we as an adult can say, oof, I got that wrong. I got that wrong. You're not frustrated. You are so mad. You are so mad, and you're just letting me know because I got that wrong. That's so important in being able to show our authenticity, our congruence, and keeping the child in the lead, which is the point. So it's very important that we are starting with you or you are, and that we are having a go at some of those reflections to reflect both, as I said, non-verbally and verbally, what is happening for the child. So we might see the child take a big sigh, and we might say something like, that was really hard, or that was really disappointing for you. Whew. And so I'm doing it both with my verbal communication, I'm sighing with them at the end, so I'm matching that intensity, I'm showing through my tone of voice, and I'm showing through my affect, through my nonverbal cues, my facial expressions as well. So it's a whole body experience. So we lean into so many important parts of that connection in the playroom being about us being present, us being able to connect, to put whatever is kind of happening before the session or after the session parked at the door so that we can be fully available to the child. And I think that if we're not, that is where sometimes we will struggle to do those reflecting feelings. Also, there may be that challenge if there is feelings that are uncomfortable for us to hold. And again, I think that that is such an important part of this work. And I will always say this, that as a play therapist, you are constantly learning. And, 10 years down the line, I've still got many years to go in terms of learning this work and growing in my practice, because every child that I connect with is yet another teacher, an incredible gift of a teacher that can teach me more about my practice and myself at the same time that I am supporting their healing and growth too. So it is so important that if there is feelings or emotions that are triggering for us or impact our congruence, or we pick up on in that countertransference, that we're taking that to clinical supervision and we're unpacking that with somebody safe for us, or personal therapy, or both. That is always a part of the work, that we are taking care of us in that emotional space as well as the child. Noticing that, engaging in that self-reflection, engaging in that journaling, whatever works for you, to begin to understand what that is about those feelings that activate you, to be able to Be your best version of yourself when you come into the playroom each time with that child. But I want to be transparent and authentic, guys, because I live and breathe this stuff, that there is going to be things, because we're human as play therapists. And that's really important for us to recognize as well, is we're going to have bad days too. We're going to have hard days. We're going to have great days, but it's going to ebb and flow. And being able to be authentic is absolutely the key, for sure. What are some of the other pitfalls that we can get into here when we are doing this particular skill as play therapists? So definitely overusing those reflections and using kind of every opportunity to make a reflection. It can feel very clinical, it can feel very mechanical or clunky and not genuine when we are doing it too much and trying too hard. And so we want to be really mindful of that. I think that another, I don't want to say if it's a pitfall, but a beginning challenge for beginning play therapists is often around missing the affect. So we focus on the behavior and we skip the emotion. So I offer and extend that self-reflection for all of you listening. Has there been times where maybe you have sat in that safer route of just tracking or reflecting content as opposed to having a go instead in reflecting those feelings? Because if you're feeling kind of a little bit of that resistance to going a little bit deeper, again, please unpack this, explore this as part of your learning and growth as well, because I think it's sometimes safer for beginning play therapists to follow the play as opposed to stopping and observing, and then having a go at reflecting feelings instead. Important to consider. It's also important that we are aware of our own assumptions as therapists. So being really careful not to project our own feelings. This is where countertransference comes in, guys. So what is a way to counteract that and be able to navigate that? There's lots of different ways, obviously, but in terms of that language, my message is to go gently, to go calmly with that real level of compassion and connection when we are doing those reflections instead. It's important that right now you're letting me know. I think that looking at that is very important in terms of the language that we use. To start with, you're feeling really, and then having a go at that. Really starting with those kind of basics, if you're feeling stuck, would be very helpful. And really taking notice of just using beginning fairly sort of succinct statements so that you can begin to reflect some of those feelings rather than us being motivated or driven by some of those feelings that we are experiencing in that moment. Keeping it directed and reflected towards the child is really important. Okay, so when we are looking at our own self-reflection, which I've talked a little bit about over this podcast, I really want to offer a space to give you that opportunity to notice when certain emotions stir for you in the playroom. And that's something to consider and reflect on with your supervisor and in your work. What could that look like? So when you observe sadness, do you want to fix that quickly for the child in the playroom, especially if you've got, say, a 2 or 3-year-old in front of you in the playroom? Is your instinct or your immediate response to try and console or help or fix for the child? And that can also go for older kids as well. When we see older kids who are struggling to complete a task, oftentimes when we are working with children, especially with a trauma background, and even more so in the population of kids with experiences of domestic violence, we can certainly observe kids with a term we use in play therapy called learned helplessness. And that has been part of their survival, is to defer responsibility to the adults because it kept them safe through their experiences. And so when we see that in the playroom, it may be our instinct to jump in and fix because we just want to help the child to feel better. So noticing what comes up and stirs for us when we meet certain presentations in the playroom and certain emotions in the playroom, like disappointment, like helplessness, all of those really tough feelings that kids express, and how we want to respond, and being really mindful of staying true to our CCPT protocol, which is really important. Reflecting feelings requires the therapist to sit with the child's discomfort without rushing. And this is where I think imposter syndrome comes in a little bit, guys, as well. That comes and goes throughout your career. I wish it was something that didn't stick around, but it does. And I just want to normalize that for anyone in the beginning of their journey or a long way down the line. Sitting in the uncomfortable without rushing can really test our commitment to trusting the process, trusting ourselves, and trusting the child. Because we truly, if we live by our principles of CCPT, we believe in that self-actualization principle that children will move towards that personal growth if given the right space to do. So that includes not putting them on a timeline prescribed by adults, which is a whole other podcast, you guys, on funding. Let's not talk about that tonight. So being able to sit in the uncomfortable, very important. We need to be looking at, in extending your practice, guys, for those of you listening who are struggling with this particular skill, have a go at it outside of sessions. Role play with colleagues, role play with other connections in your network, not for the purposes of any kind of therapeutic intervention, but just having a go at reflecting those feelings. It is very helpful in really cementing that skill into your practice. Try reflecting feelings in your everyday conversations. It can be a great tool to use in helping to really hear in those more adult conversations, verbal communication, to be able to help those that you're listening to feel validated and heard. I've done a number of conference presentations over the years, and I did one about 12 months ago now. And one of the activities that we do in my presentation is I get participants to turn to the person next to them. And for 5 minutes, we get one person to talk and the other person is the listener, and they're only allowed to reflect those feelings for 5 minutes. So it's something that you can do. You can try it. You can practice it to really strengthen that skill. What I also want to encourage you guys is to embrace those mistakes. Embrace those mistakes. Sometimes we're not always going to get it right. As play therapists, we're not perfect. Not perfect, guys. But like I said earlier, if we're wrong, the child will correct us. So how great is that? You really actually can't get it wrong, because if you do get it wrong, you'll get it right because the child will tell you. So that still models that emotional communication when they do correct us, which is great as well. So reflecting feelings is just one of those skills, guys, that we are introducing in the podcast and really going through those fundamentals of child-centered play therapy. So where does it sit? As I was saying earlier at kind of the start, we've got tracking and then reflecting feelings. There are other skills that really integrate nicely with this particular skill. So returning responsibility and that encouragement versus praise is also very heavily linked to reflecting feelings. Together and using them together builds a safe and growth-focused environment in the playroom, which is fantastic. So I want to wrap up this podcast. Guys, I'm actually on time. I'm only at 30 minutes. This is incredible. I really enjoyed talking through this skill because I think it is one of those fundamental skills in CCPT that for beginning play therapists is tough to, I guess, master. I don't even want to say master because I feel like we're constantly evolving as play therapists, but to feel you have a handle on, because it is very different to other modalities, even those psychotherapy modalities where we might have had reflecting feelings. This is a different level when we're working with kids because we're not getting necessarily that verbal input back to say that we're on the right track. So we really have to use all of our tools in our toolkit to implement this particular skill. So let's just summarize what I've talked about. In reflecting feelings, we're helping children to put words to their emotions, validating their experiences, helping their self-regulation skills, and building a deeper therapeutic relationship. How great is that? We've just listed like 4 benefits of doing these reflecting feelings. So this is why it's so important you have a go. What I want to offer you is that extension for reflection at the end of the podcast. Sometimes I remember to do this, sometimes I don't, but today I've remembered. So what I want to extend to you, extending from the activity I mentioned earlier in this podcast, with this question to you: when did you last truly feel understood, and what impact did that have on you? And if you really want to expand your reflections, I have a second one. How do you notice children express feelings without words? Oof, some big questions, you guys. That brings us to the end of episode 11. I hope that some of these reflections and the information I've shared on reflecting feelings has been helpful for you in your practice. Like I started this episode saying, I am so incredibly grateful for all of the support of the podcast. We're continuing to grow and continuing to reach more listeners, and I'm so proud of that. We would love your feedback, so please feel free to connect with us, as I said, on social media, on our Instagram page at the Play Therapy Circle podcast. Give us a follow on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you get your podcasts. And thank you so much for listening. What are we going to do next week, guys? Hopefully, I'm going to be a little bit better. I'm not going to have the flu next week, you guys. So thanks for listening when I've got the flu. So I'm going to feel better next week. I'm putting it out into the universe. But also, episode 12 is going to be on limit setting. Ooh, the good stuff, right? The stuff that we as play therapists, beginning play therapists especially, struggle with. And I want to talk about my journey in really incorporating limit setting and seeing it as such a pivotal component of the work that we do in the playroom, where I definitely struggled in the beginning. So I can't wait to share with you guys my journey. But hey, thanks everyone for listening. Thank you so much for your support. Look after each other and look after yourselves. And I will see you again next week. Bye. Thank you so much for being here for another episode of the Play Therapy Circle. If anything resonated with you today, I'd love it if you could follow the podcast, share it with a colleague, or leave a short review. It really helps others find our circle. And if you have a topic or question you'd love me to explore, I'd love to hear from you. This space is for you, and I want it to feel like a conversation. Until next time, take care of yourself, and remember, you belong here.